Bloodstream Journeys is produced by Bloodstream Media and made possible exclusively by BioMarin. Hi there, I'm Heather Robb, and this is Journeys, a new monthly podcast from Bloodstream Media that features the stories of 3 individuals within the bleeding disorders community. Happy Leap Month, and thank you for joining us for the 3rd episode of Journeys. Today we're going to hear stories from 3 women with 3 very different perspectives and life experiences, also incidentally from 3 different countries, the US, Great Britain, and Israel. But what struck me as I reflected on their journeys was that they were all able to find a degree of humor. As mothers, daughters, and individuals, that sense of humor, ranging from laugh out loud to just an air of lightness, seems to make their load a bit more manageable, and certainly makes their journey a delight to listen to. Our first contributor is Rhea Peak. Her reflection on life with VWD does not pull a single punch, and you can tell right away that her sense of humor has helped her through some very challenging experiences. Here is Rhea Peak.
It occurred to me recently how in all the information leaflets, websites, and medical textbooks describing the signs and symptoms of bleeding disorders in women, it lists menorrhagia, heavy menstrual bleeding, easy bruising, and frequent mucosal nosebleeds. But never once have I read a real, true account of what this actually means. So, here is one, straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. First up, periods. Read it and weep, grab a bucket. If you're male, always remember this when addressing your girlfriend, mother, sister, supermarket lady. They have to deal with this on some level on a regular basis. And despite the invention of ice cream, Netflix, and painkillers, it still sucks. A day in the life of a von Willebrand disease VWD woman at this wonderful time, in my experience, can be likened to the prom scene in Carrie, and can bring around a similar level of disdain for the education system in teenage years. In reality, it's setting your phone alarm every hour during the night to ensure you haven't bled through, and not being able to fall back to sleep due to the nauseating pain in your abdomen. It's hoping not to have to explain your constant trips to the bathroom during lectures, work, social gatherings. It's missing school days because of the times you bled out during the classroom, and despite having a wonderful best friend who lent you her coat to cover up with, everybody noticing. It's not sleeping in the same bed as your partner for worry of awkward incidents, and it's becoming so exhausted and unwell from the consistent bleeding. 6-week-long periods has not been uncommon in my experience. You pass out walking down the street, shopping at a friend's house. It's packing every bag with the supply of protection for those times where, even though your treatment is working and you're taking everything you need, your condition would just like to give you a kick to remind you it's still there. This may be on a coach ride, a night out, or at exactly the worst possible moment entirely. People's reception to these issues vary, some being heartwarmingly gracious, kind, and dignified, others not so much. A couple of cruel teaching staff spring to mind. Next, easy bruising. The kind that may lead to social services involvement, much to my poor mother's despair, because as a child, I had the coordination of an inebriated jellyfish, still do, and felt the need to be a part of any contact sport I knew I should not be. This led to a regular, substantial amount of bruising passers-by could only assume were caused purposefully and felt the need to help. It's tripping up on some stairs and not being able to use that leg properly for a matter of months, let alone wearing anything other than jeans, despite it being midsummer and sundress season. It may be partners telling you they no longer want to be with you because they don't want to have to worry about you breaking, and your issues are ones which deem you in some way unattractive or unworthy. Worse, it can lead to people to assume your relationship is one which involves domestic abuse. Frequent mucosal nosebleeds. Way, one of my favourites. The classic nosebleed, the waking up with blood all over your face and wondering what the hell happened to your lipstick. The one cocktail down nosebleed, when you're one drink in, beautiful shoes on, an adorable man in your line of vision, and it just happens to be at that point an acknowledgement to a dear friend's tissue issues. Another untimely example of VWD creeping up to say hello are the times where you just want to enjoy an apple. Yes, this is partially a lie. It's more likely to be some form of sweet, and life won't even grant you this. One minor slip, and you're in for a gum, tongue, lip bleed, which is likely to go on for a number of hours, during which, if you do attempt to smile, you look like a member of the cast of The Vampire Diaries. Unfortunately, I am referring to the vampire bit post-devouring human blood, not the ridiculously attractive nature of the cast. Through these trials of varying degrees, I've come to value the power of humour and the realisation that we are all, in fact, human. Yes, a predisposition to abnormal bleeding and bruising may be a drag, but personally, in some ways, this allows me to view life from a greater perspective. As I grow older, I value the days in which I feel well to a greater extent, and in some ways, this in itself is a gift. This was just a brief insight into a day in the life of a VWD woman. The good, the bad, and the downright embarrassing. I'm sure between us all, there are many more amusing anecdotes, insights, and lessons to be shared. Ree.
Next, we're going to hear from Tabitha White. Tabitha shares her journey from the child of a father with hemophilia in the early 90s to the mother of a son with hemophilia today, and how those experiences impact each other in positive and challenging ways. Heavy subject matter, but somehow she finds lightness. Here's Tabitha White.
There are some moments in your life that are so pivotal, they stay frozen in your mind forever. You could recreate the moment down to the smallest details. The colors of the wall, the feel of the upholstery, the exact people that were in the room. In my own life, most of those moments have revolved around my family's health, and most of those moments can be traced back to hemophilia. My dad was born in the 1960s, and he and his older brother were both diagnosed with severe hemophilia. My grandparents would travel 45 minutes to an hour for doctors to infuse whole blood when my dad or his older brother would have a bleed. They padded all the bars around their cribs and put them in bulky but protective helmets. Life was hard, and both my dad and uncle spent more than their fair share of time in our local children's hospital. My mom still has copies of their report cards that show more absences than days they were actually present at school. But the hops and stubbornness in both of them wouldn't let hemophilia keep them down. My uncle loved to work with a 4-H club at his high school, and my dad was full of life and spitfire. My family members loved to tell stories of how serious Mike was about his 4-H projects, and how my dad would play jokes and keep everyone laughing. Then tragedy struck the family. My uncle was injured at school and died from complications of the bleed. Hemophilia seemed to have the upper hand in the family for a time, but it would not succeed in defining our family's legacy. Fast forward to 6-year-old me in a moment that's seared in my memory. I still remember sitting on our old floral sofa with my parents as they explained to me that my daddy was HIV positive. While I don't remember their exact words, I remember hurling myself into my mom's lap and asking if that meant my daddy was going to die. You see, as a child of a hemophiliac in the early 90s, I had already known people who had died from AIDS. I had been to NHF conferences. I had eaten the yummy food, stayed in the fancy hotels, snagged free swag from the vendor tables, and started to notice that some people weren't at the conference the next year because of this disease called AIDS. My 6-year-old mind couldn't fully understand what we were about to walk through, but I could tell you the ultimate outcome. My daddy was going to die from a cruel disease that no one deserved. It looked again like hemophilia was going to define our family, and not in a positive way. But once again, the hops and stubbornness showed up, and my dad embraced this opportunity to help others. He and my mom spent years pouring into the Alabama chapter and building relationships with families across the country. He would write letters to encourage and advocate, and his letterhead bore one of his favorite Bible verses, Proverbs 29:18, which says, "Without a vision, people perish." My parents had a clear vision. They wanted to share encouragement, love, and strength with other families that were fighting the same battles. I remember sitting in the front row of his funeral and being amazed at all the flowers from people around the country. One by one, people would hug me and tell me how amazing he was. And he truly was. Where some people saw limitations, he saw opportunity to educate and encourage. And I would like to think that he passed that outlook on to me. That outlook would be tested several times in the years to come, though. Fast forward to the summer of 2016, and another series of events that I will never forget. Our family was on vacation in Disney, and I realized that something wasn't quite right. My mom and my husband Jason thought that I was just being paranoid, but I contacted my doctor about a week after we returned home. After an abnormal mammogram, I was immediately referred to a surgeon who confirmed my worst fear. I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer at age 32. This had not been in my plan for my life. Surgery was followed by an appointment with an oncologist to determine the best course of treatment. But sometimes it's funny to see how God works. 3 weeks after meeting with my oncologist, I was making an appointment with another doctor, my obstetrician. Through laughter and shock, she told me that I was 6 weeks pregnant. I could not believe that I was going from a cancer diagnosis to finding out we were having another baby. My generally organized world had been flipped head over heels in a matter of weeks. I remember sitting with Jason and deciding that if we were going to walk through cancer and a surprise third baby, that we would walk through it together and encourage others along the way. On May 2nd, 2017, the world met our not-so-little Caden James. We named him in honor of my dad without realizing just how much they would have in common. I had known for most of my life I was the carrier of hemophilia, but I was hoping and praying that this wouldn't be passed on to Caden. However, within 12 hours of meeting our sweet baby, we were hit with a diagnosis, severe hemophilia A. I could take you to the hospital room where our precious pediatrician held my hand as he delivered the news. To a mom whose dad didn't survive the tainted factor, this was soul-crushing news. I held my baby boy as closely as I could and apologized that I had passed on my defective genes. In my postpartum mind, Caden had lost the genetic lottery. Our pediatrician told us that he had seen his only other patient with hemophilia the day before, and he felt like God wanted us to know that Caden was going to be okay. I just held Caden and cried and prayed that our pediatrician was right. When Caden was 10 days old, we loaded up and we made our way to our local hemophilia clinic for our first hematology appointment. We didn't even make it into the parking space before my ugly crying had started. Much to Jason's chagrin, those tears would continue through the entire 2-hour appointment. I literally cried my way through an entire box of Kleenex. I remember being so very overwhelmed by conversations about signs of bleeds, prophylactic dosing, port installation, helmets, and knee pads. The only thing I was certain about was that my sweet baby would never receive plasma-based factor. Never. Our hematologist attempted to explain that this could be a viable and safe option for Caden, but my mind couldn't get past my experience with tainted factor in the 1980s. We left Caden's appointment with armloads of books filled with more information than my mind could absorb. Jason left feeling much more informed, while I just left feeling incredibly overwhelmed. A few days later, I decided that I would dive headlong into research on how to be the best hemo mom ever. I picked up a notepad, highlighter, and the copy of Raising a Child with Hemophilia that we had been given by our hematology team. I read one paragraph and burst into tears again. It was so hard to accept the diagnosis after having seen the way that my parents had suffered. But it also drove home just how amazing their determination and perseverance really had been. At just the right moment, God sent encouragement that I desperately needed. My cousin is the mom of an extremely athletic teenager with severe hemophilia A. As soon as she heard that Caden had hemophilia, she reached out to me via Facebook. In her very first message to me, she reassured me, "This will not define Caden. Your dad was one of the bravest people I knew, and Caden will be too." Those words were like healing to my worn heart. My tears didn't stop that day, but there was a subtle shift in my outlook. I realized that yes, Caden had a diagnosis that I would not have chosen, but that also brought along with it a whole new set of opportunities for all of us. Like my parents, we would make it our goal to encourage and uplift everyone we met along this path of hemophilia. Caden had his first of many bleeds at 6 months old after his first clinic visit. Within a few hours of the appointment, he refused to bend his left arm or even let us touch it. It was the night of our oldest daughter's birthday party, so we did what parents do. We divided and conquered. My mom and I took 5 girls for queso and tacos, while Jason took Caden for his first infusion. Jason kept me updated through text and explained how they mixed the factor and how hard it had been for them to find a vein. Jason brought Caden home that night, and we held him like a China doll, afraid that the slightest thing might break him. Over the next 11 months, Jason and I would take turns going to ER and clinic visits for Caden to be infused with his Superman juice, as we nicknamed his factor. He was a rather chubby guy, which made finding a good vein quite an expedition. Over that time, I learned to advocate, insist, and then advocate a little more to make sure that Caden had the best nurses so he wasn't treated like a human pincushion. I learned that the veins on either side of his chubby feet were the money shots, and I learned to politely demand that they bring in the vein finder when a nurse insisted on trying to dig for veins in his very fluffy hands. When Caden was 15 months old, we reluctantly accepted the fact that it was time to schedule him for port surgery. I kept the reminder on my desk for 3 days before I worked up the courage to call our HTC to schedule the surgery. A few minutes after hanging up, our care coordinator called back and said our doctor wanted us to research a new non-plasma therapy that was waiting for FDA approval. She told me to dig into research for 2 weeks, then we would regroup. For the full 2 weeks, I was reading everything I could get my hands on. I spoke with a representative for our area, and we attended an educational dinner. By the end of the dinner, Jason was hooked. Again, the early 90s flashed into my brain. How can we truly know if this is safe? It's so very new, and this is my baby boy. But after lots of conversations and prayers, I eventually agreed with Jason, and we let our hematology team know that we wanted to make the switch. We started anxiously watching for news of the report to announce that the treatment had been approved for patients without inhibitors. When the news finally broke, I burst into tears. Jason and I both felt like our prayers had been answered. I don't think I'll ever forget how excited and proud I felt the first time that I gave Caden his shot. It felt like reclaiming ground from hemophilia and doing a little more defining of this diagnosis. No, hemophilia will not negatively define Caden or our family. It's just another piece of life. Caden has now been on his new treatment plan for 1.5 years. In that time, he hasn't had any bleeds and has only had a handful of small bruises. His energy level is through the roof, and our friends have come to realize that he won't shatter if or when he falls. And I've been able to breathe much easier and realize that while this wild ball of boy has a diagnosis, that diagnosis doesn't limit his future at all. In fact, it will help instill even a little more tenacity and drive into his life. Like his grandfather, Caden takes on the world with wide open energy. He lights up the room with a smile and brings limitless laughter with his Avenger quoting and dinosaur roars. In his short 2.5 years, he's taught our family so much about ourselves and our future. Caden has taught his sisters compassion for others and the power of knowledge. He's inspired his youngest sister's dream of becoming a nurse, while his oldest sister has spent time explaining hemophilia in great detail to anyone that will listen. He's taught Jason and I the power of advocating for what we know is best for him. We've learned to research medicines and ask lots of questions when we don't understand. We've learned to notice the small changes that can show a bleed is coming on while still letting him be a normal, rough and tumble boy. And I'm still learning not to let the scars from my past cloud my vision for the future. Yes, our community has a past filled with tears and critical errors by those we trusted. But our future, it's looking so very bright. With this new treatment, Caden won't experience the joint damage and pain that my dad dealt with on a daily basis. I'm learning to use the empowerment and knowledge that I've gained to help new hemo moms become more confident in their new normal. This journey has transformed me from a daughter admiring her parents' strength in the face of adversity to a mom of 3 kids that know their mom will advocate for them with everything that is in her. And if my journey helps one other hemo mom to feel more confident in her abilities, it will all be worth it.
Lastly, we're going to hear from Molly Livingstone. Molly shares her journey helping her son learn to self-infuse. Molly is a professional storyteller in Israel, and it's very clear that humor is one of the tools she uses to process and share her life experiences. Here is Molly Livingstone.
Last year, I did the unthinkable, the unimaginable, unheard of, unpredictable, unbelievable, unconscionable. I don't even know if that last one is a real word or has an actual meaning, but I'm using it for effect here. Last Thanksgiving, I made a pie. I know, there's that saying we've heard a million times, easy as pie. And I don't know who came up with it, but clearly it was some pilgrim with a shake and bake oven mix and a fairy godmother from Disney that used birds to create a perfect crust with gooey inside of pure joy only your childhood dreams could experience. What I'm saying is, this mama don't make pies. And it was a challenge that after obtaining a BA, 3 children, a career with twists and turns, and 2 hemophiliacs, I decided I was finally ready to take on. Clearly, I made a pumpkin pie using a simple recipe. That is to say, I Googled how to make an easy pumpkin pie. It took Google a few seconds because easy recipes seem to be a thing that I Google a lot. But there it was, 1 can of pumpkin. You didn't think I would scoop it out of the real thing, did you? Sugar, eggs, the usual. The crust was a beast. It was the first time I used a rolling pin for its actual purpose. Please don't ask me what else it's been used for. This story is already weird enough. I got all the parts together, mixed them, poured the batter, baked at the right temperature, and let it cool. It looked fine. I was semi-pleased with myself. After all, this was hard, and all the uns above. My pie was ready for the world. I wanted to proclaim my achievement, and so, with 2 steady hands and a towel for safety, I took her out of the oven. I turned to place her on the table in all her glory. But the unthinkable happened. Yep, another un for you. I teetered and tottered for no reason, or maybe it was my unconscious. I think the word is subconscious, but that doesn't work in my story. I slipped, the pie flew, and before I knew it, there was a Thanksgiving massacre of pumpkin and spice surrounded by glass and gooey insides. Yes, I checked with a toothpick. It was everywhere, and so was I. My emotions, my hand gestures, my facial expressions. Just like the pie, my dreams were shattered. Easy as pie. What is easy as pie? What is easy? Things are hard. Life is hard. Days are hard. Being a mom is hard. Working for the man is hard. Thinking about my future is hard. The pie crust was hard, despite it not even being fully cooked. So how then do I teach my son how to inject himself with factor 8 if I can't even make a pie, which is so easy? How do I instill confidence and encourage him when I'm still finding my way through the kitchen of life? Do I embrace the mess, or do I scold myself as I pick up the pieces? And where does his factor in? This past summer, he was fortunate enough to attend his first hemophilia summer camp, full of fun and self-injection trainings. Like any first-time sleepaway camper, he cried and begged to come home. Unlike most first-time sleepaway campers, he had a trained staff of social workers, psychologists, and nurses to help him through the emotional and obvious physical pains of hemophilia camp life. He was the youngest one there, but also the most comfortable in the learning process. My husband was a trained medic in the Army, and from an early age had him practicing injections. Don't worry, not with factor, just a simple saline concentrate. He was scared but brave and able to inject himself twice in the 5 days of camp. To me, my son Amichai is my superhero. I have always been afraid of needles and blood. I remember locking myself in many hospital bathrooms to avoid blood tests and vaccines. But him? He sucks it up, gets his factor like a champ, and moves on, even if we have to do it 2 or 3 times in 1 week because of a bleed. But now, doing them on his own, his confidence is like mine when it comes to pies, unsure. He sits with the needle so close to his skin that he often pricks himself, and he cries and he screams. He just can't do it. Sometimes we sit like this for an hour. I tell him everything I can remember from a Tony Robbins Netflix documentary I binge watched, every positive quote I've seen posted on Facebook, songs they sing you to encourage you to pee on the potty. Desperate. Then I get frustrated and tell him, just do it. You're right there. Then I feel horrible. Then I say, I can just do it for him this time, no pressure. Then more tears. I'm not even sure who's crying anymore. Screams about lighting, pillows moving, his brother watching him. The dog's tail is too close. The alcohol pad is dry. It hurts. He hates it. He says he's dumb. He says his body is stupid. He says he wishes he could just be normal without hemophilia. He's so angry, he ages on the spot. Yet, his innocent eyes make me feel like the bad guy as I grapple with the "I did this to him" mantra in my mind. And then, after the torture, he somehow fights back and injects. He's in, but there's no relief. He's at an awkward angle. He has stabbed himself somewhere near the vein, but not quite in it. And there are more tears. He screams, he's stupid, he's a failure. I scream, the doctors couldn't even do this. And he is doing a great job. And look, he just has to move it just a tiny bit, and we're in, and we are. But we aren't done, because although he now has his factor, and we have cleaned up the mess, we're still a hot mess. He's still upset. I'm still upset. He's still angry with his body and his mind and his hemophilia. And I'm still disappointed that I can't make him see how special and amazing he is for taking on this challenge. Because it's not easy as pie for him. Amichai is my oldest, so it's fair to say I'm making the most mistakes with him as a parent. When he was starting to sit up as a baby, my husband and I were having a fight about something: trash, laundry, the weird smell in the fridge, and Amichai fell and hit his head. We were worried, but at this point, there hadn't been that many bleeds, so we were optimistically conscious. We sent him to daycare and warned the caregiver what to look out for, and then went about our day. Later that evening, Amichai threw up. He never even spit up. So it was weird. This was the first real scare for us, and we were scared. Let's say Amichai was not the only one who needed a diaper in that moment. We rushed to the hospital, and after a dose of factor, the doctor said, "Let's wait," and we did. But Amichai threw up again and again. That's when they decided to give my little baby a CT scan. Luckily, he was so tired they didn't have to use any drugs. His tiny little body went into the big tunnel. And yes, my husband and I hoped there was light at the end of it. It was the longest 20 minutes of my life waiting for those results. Turns out, it was a virus. Yep, a stomach virus. And not a head injury. What a fluke. My confidence as a parent was knocked hard that day. And there are still days like that. Because of hemophilia or because he's just a kid, that I find myself struggling to put him perfectly together. Yes, it's like I'm looking for the recipe on Google. Easy, successful child pie, vegan crust. Unlike pumpkin, you can't find it in a can. It, confidence, self-worth. Obviously, as I share this with you, I am aware that his issues of confidence and self-worth are my issues of confidence and self-worth. In a recent extra dose for the week of factor, Amichai cried and cried, telling me to be patient with him. He said he didn't want me to be disappointed in him or get stressed out, but that he was afraid. I told him I only get frustrated because we go into this unnecessary, dramatic place where at the end of it, we're still going to do it. He still needs factor. The needle waves in the air as I explain it, and his tears drip down his face, trying to blur reality. But I am the dramatic one. I remember my dad telling me to cut the crap and just accept it. I think I was upset about not understanding my math homework, so there was no needle, but those problems definitely caused me great bodily harm. See? Dramatic. Amichai needed this extra dose because he went on an 8-mile bike ride. And when I asked him to stretch just before bed, he fessed up to some pain on his thigh. After speaking with the hemophilia expert, it was decided that it was best to inject now. And so, way past his bedtime, after an awesome day, he screamed and cried about everything. It was the worst day. He is the worst. Having hemophilia is the worst. He kept saying, I wish I could be a regular kid. I hate injections. I hate doing them. I hate that I'm bad at them. It's not fair that other kids are perfect and there's nothing wrong with them. And again, I remember myself feeling this way too, because I feel this way all the time. After all, you know this isn't just a kid issue. We are constantly judging, and I am constantly jealous. I was like that as a kid and trying so hard to break the habit as an adult. I tell Amichai that no one is perfect. Everyone has their flaws, their problems, and if they tell you they are perfect, then more than likely they feel inside they are not and that they are trying to hide it. I tell him I felt like this when I was a kid, when all my friends had huge houses with pools and we had a rented 2-bedroom that I never brought anyone home to. He misses the point and says, well, we rent too, and our apartment is small. So I tell him he missed the point, and then he tells me how his friend Netta is perfect. I tell him she's short. He says that doesn't matter. I said it does, and it could affect her health or confidence. He says he'd rather be short than have hemophilia. I tell him he's only saying that because he is tall. We are lost in our words. The needle is still in the air, the tears still blurring reality. When they cure hemophilia, I will be perfect. Checkmate. What do I say to that? No, you won't. Or yes, then you won't have any problems. I tell him I understand. I play the cards I have because I don't know the rules of chess, and I am pretty sure checkmate means it's over. And as his father tries to hold him down, he screams to give him one more chance on his own. He says he hates himself. He wishes I would just punish him and let him go to sleep. He says he would rather not live. And inside my heart is a Thanksgiving pumpkin pie massacre, shattered in pieces of glass and goo. He does it, though. Needle straight to the vein, with shaking hands. Not exactly in the right place. He cries for me to take it out. I ask him to stop moving and slowly move it into the right position. Clean up my mess. Pick up the glass pieces. The crust that looks more like cardboard than food. The cinnamon-flavored filling that will remain in the tile cracks for longer than I would like to admit. It's done. He has factor. He has anger. He has hemophilia. And despite it all, he has done it again. Injected himself. So despite it all, I make another pie. It's apple this Thanksgiving. Still easy recipe, Googled and found. I ask my kids to help me this time. They peel the skin, I cut, they add sugar, I stir, I use a rolling pin for the second time. The dough looks better, or maybe I'm learning to accept my flaws and embrace them, as I sprinkle on the cinnamon to cover up the thin parts where the crust doesn't quite cover the apples. Every time Amichai injects himself, I'm trying to make him realize how special he is, that it is his hemophilia, that his hemophilia can be a strength, and injecting yourself a skill, unlike most. It's not easy as pie, but he has taught me to keep baking. And when I put this pie in the oven, there is confidence. You won't find on the list of ingredients, but it will be in every bite. My pie was delicious. I am not a fan of apple pie, so I really am impartial here. My mother-in-law told me it was one of the best she had ever had. And she is a fan. It was devoured, despite the amount of turkey gravy, cranberries, potatoes, sweet potatoes, more turkey, and green beans people ate. Amichai has continued to inject himself, and with new tools of positive reinforcement, a chart, breathing, and preparing his body, well, mine too, there are days when he is able to inject immediately. On those days, I remind him that it wasn't just a physical motion that got him into the vein, but a mental state that gave him the confidence he needed. He says it didn't hurt, and I tell him that helps me with the pain too. He doesn't quite get what I mean, but it is my needle to bear as well. I no longer want to make the perfect pie, but one that I can be happy with. I want that for Amichai too. I know hemophilia is not who he is, but I see now how it does play a significant role in his life. everything from sports to being self-assured. I want him to be happy with himself, and that feeling to be as easy as pie.
This episode of Bloodstream Journeys was written by Heather Robb, featuring real-life stories from Rhea Peak, Tabitha White, and Molly Livingstone. This episode was produced by Rob Bradford, Avra Friedman, and Joshua Sterling Bragg. Audio editing and sound design by Joshua Sterling Bragg and Colby Crow. Distribution and engagement by Avra Friedman and Colby Crow. Art and promotion by Katie Wright-Mead and Ryan Gielen, and Bloodstream Journeys is executive produced by Patrick James Lynch and Ryan Gielen. Special thanks to Ori Kadashe at Mezqueca Studios. If you want to reflect on your journey to this moment right here, and tell your story, visit us at bloodstreammedia.com/mystory. We have a simple form. Write your story in it. Or tell us a little about yourself and what you want to write about, even if you don't yet know how. And click submit. We'll be in touch, and together we'll get your story told. Bloodstream Journeys would not be possible without the incredible ongoing support of BioMarin. So we say thank you to BioMarin for their vision and generosity and all the ways they empower the bleeding disorders community to learn, heal, and grow through self-expression. Thank you, BioMarin. Other Bloodstream podcasts include the community touchstone, the Bloodstream Podcast. Bloodstream is an entertaining and informative podcast hosted by Natalie and Patrick Lynch and provides a 360-degree look at the bleeding disorders community through news, interviews, and informed opinionating on the topics that matter most. We also produce the popular Ask the Expert podcast. Ask the Expert was created to help answer some of the biggest questions we receive from community members, both online and in person, as we travel the country producing content and live events for the community. Ask the Expert is hosted by Believe's Director of Innovation and former nonprofit executive, Amy Board, and features the top community experts on new subjects every episode. Also, there will be a bunch of new shows and podcasts coming throughout 2020 from Bloodstream Media. So be sure to visit www.bloodstreammedia.com for all of the shows produced by us. Or you can search Bloodstream Media anywhere podcasts are distributed, downloaded, streamed, or watched. Happy listening.